Hey everyone, it's triplemangothreat, and today we're talking about commanders that should have one more color to them. Let's talk about that. These commanders are all monocolor or one color commanders, so this limits what color cards we can play in EDH. So I'm making this video talking about what if these commanders had more than one color? What if they had an additional color added? What would that color be, and how can it make the commander and the deck run even better? I'm going to be going by color, so let's start with the white commanders. Darien, King of Keldor. For 4 and 2 white, we have a 3/3 human soldier. Whenever you're dealt damage, you may create that many 1/1 white soldier creature tokens. So initially, I thought that black would be the automatic choice for this, but I learned that paying life is not taking damage. You'll need cards that specifically say the word damage in order to get Darien's tokens. So then I did some research and I checked out red. Red is the absolute perfect color for Darien. Check out Spear Spewer and Goblin Fireslinger. For 1 red mana, we can start dealing ourselves 1 damage each turn to start making those soldier tokens. And Spear Spewer is going to be dealing our opponents damage, so it's an added bonus to what we're already wanting to do. We have some one-time spells with Earthquake and Flame Rift. With Earthquake, we can pay X and deal damage to each creature and, more importantly, each player. So if we pay 3 for the X, we're still getting 3 tokens and we could be taking care of some flying creatures in the way. A really crazy card would be Court of Ire. For 3 red. We have an enchantment, and when it enters the battlefield, we're going to become the Monarch. So already we're going to be drawing cards at our end step, which is really helpful for red and white, and at the beginning of our upkeep, Court of Ire is going to deal 2 damage to any target. But if we're the Monarch, it's going to deal 7 damage to that player or permanent instead. So this means we could be taking 7 each upkeep. We're making 7 tokens. We get to draw cards at our end step. It just gets really good. So we're going to be taking a lot of damage with Court of Ire and all the other cards I mentioned as well. But we can actually combat that with cards like Soul's Attendant and Soul Warden. They're the exact same card but just different names, but when another creature enters the battlefield, you gain 1 life. So this means our creatures and our opponents as well, but most importantly, our creatures. We're making a lot of tokens by taking a lot of damage. So when Court of Ire deals us 7 damage, we're going to make 7 soldier tokens. And then we're going to gain 7 life when a creature enters the battlefield, or 14 if these are both out on the battlefield. This can be really insane. Now for the home runs of the deck, like pretty much what's going to end the game, are cards like Impact Tremors, Heartless Hitsugo, and Goblin Bombardment. When a creature enters the battlefield under our control, we're dealing each opponent 1 damage, but we're going to be making, those 7 tokens each upkeep, so that's 7 damage to our opponents each one of our upkeeps. Heartless Hitsugo is just a mean one because we can tap it, it deals damage to each player equal to half that player's life total rounded down. So let's assume we're all at 40, we're now at 20 life. I have 20 tokens, they're just at 20 life. But again, if we have Impact Tremors as well, and we make those 20 tokens, our opponents will die. And Goblin Bombardment is a great sack outlet because we can sacrifice a creature and it's going to deal 1 damage to target creature or player. We can choose ourselves in this case, and so when we deal ourselves damage, we get a soldier token. And then if we have Soul Warden and Soul's Attendant out, we gain 2 life. So every time we hit ourselves, we're gaining 2 life, so we're netting 1 life, or just infinite ETB triggers. So we can have infinite life, infinite ETB triggers with this, and then once we have infinite life, we can start doing pretty much anything we want. We can make 1,000,000 tokens, and then sacrifice those 1,000,000 tokens to kill our opponents. The next white commander we're talking about is God Eternal Oketra. For 3 white. It's a 3/6 zombie god with double strike. Whenever you cast a creature spell, create a 4/4 black zombie warrior creature token with vigilance. When God Eternal Oketra dies or is put into exile from the battlefield, you may put it into its owner's library 3rd from the top. So I thought about adding blue to this commander, but blue is all about bouncing our creatures, a lot of ETBs. This is all about casting our creatures, so it led me to go to green, because when we cast creature spells, we can actually draw cards. We can do this with Primordial Sage and Soul of the Harvest. They're pretty much the same thing, but whenever we cast a creature spell, we're drawing a card, and whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under our control, we're drawing a card as well. So we can cast creature spells, we're getting 4/4 black zombie warrior creature tokens with vigilance, and we're also drawing cards, which is really going to help us not lose the flow of the deck. I often found that God Eternal Oketra kind of trips over itself, because we can keep casting creatures, we have ways to bounce them back to our hands, but there's no real card draw, so green is really going to help out. There's also Beast Whisperer for a little bit cheaper mana, only for 2 and 2 green. Whenever we cast a creature spell, we're drawing a card as well. And then we'll just end the game with cards like Overwhelming Stampede. We're going to give all our creatures +X, where X is the greatest power, so even if the greatest power is our 4/4 zombies, they're going to be 8/8s with Trample. Next, we're talking about the 1 blue commander I have picked out, and it's Patron of the Moon. For 5 blue, it's a 5/4 spirit, and it has Moonfolk Offering, which means we can play this card at any time. We can play an instant, which is really nice, but we have to sacrifice a Moonfolk creature, and then we pay the mana cost difference. difference. Patron of the Moon has flying, and we can pay 1 mana to put up to 2 land cards from our hand into play tapped. Wow, that's great. And the one color we have to pick is green, because landfall is going to be amazing in this deck. Just paying 1 mana to put 2 lands into play, even if they're tapped, that doesn't even matter to me. Just imagine how many landfall triggers we can get from this, and it's a lot. We can get some crazy card draw with cards like AC Tyrant of the Gyre Strait and Tatiova Benthic Druid. Whenever a land enters our battlefield, we're going to draw a card, and there's incidental gain the life from Tatiova. But more importantly, we can play an additional land with AC. So not just are we dropping lands on the battlefield from our commander, but we can also play an additional land if we don't want to pay that 1 mana. Of course, we have to add Avenger of Zendikar. When it enters the battlefield, we're going to create 0/1 green plant creature tokens equal to the number of lands we control. So if we control 7, we create that many plant tokens. And then it has the landfall trigger where when a land enters the battlefield, we put a +1/+1 counter on each plant creature we control. If we pay 1 mana, that means 2 +1/+1 counters on each plant creature we control if we're able to put 2 lands from our hand onto the battlefield. There's also Lotus Cobra. Just by paying that 1 mana, we get 2 mana back, because when a land enters our battlefield, we can add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. So if we have a lot of lands in our hand, we can just keep dropping them, because we're just going to make a bunch of mana. Rampaging Baloths. So whenever a land enters our battlefield, we can actually create a 4/4 beast creature token, and this is really sweet because this is going to help us win the game. We're going to be able to overwhelm our opponents just by playing our lands, drawing cards from it, getting mana from it, buffing up those plant creature tokens, and then finally getting these 4/4 green beast creature tokens. It's going to be a lot. Now moving on to the black commanders, we have Geth, Lord of the Vault for 4 black. It's a 5/5 zombie with Intimidate, which means this creature can't be blocked except by artifact creatures and or creatures that share a color with it. We can pay X and a black to put target artifact or creature card with converted mana cost X from an opponent's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control tapped, then that player mills X cards. I think the perfect color for this commander is blue, right? Because if we mill our opponents, that's more options we can grab from their graveyard, because I found with just Geth, it's a little bit harder to put cards into their graveyard besides, destroy target creature. If we can actually start milling them, then we have a lot more options. So one of the cards I want to talk about is Court of Cunning. For 1 blue, it's an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you're going to become the monarch, and at the beginning of your upkeep, any number of target players each mill 2 cards. If you're the monarch, each of those player mills 10 cards instead. This is recently printed in Commander Legends, and it's a really good card in this deck. Milling 10 cards from each of our opponents, that's a lot. And if this goes 2 or 3 turns, that's a lot of options for us to pick from. We also have Sphinx's Tutelage for 2 and a blue. It's an enchantment. Whenever we draw a card, target opponent puts the top 2 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. If they're both non-land cards that share a color, repeat this process. And it also has for 5 and a blue to help us draw a card, and then we're going to discard a card. So even if we just draw our card for turn, we'll point at an opponent and say, hey, mill your top 2. If they happen to be a monocolored deck, this is really going to hurt them, because it's very likely they're going to run into 2 cards that share a color, and then they have to repeat for each time this happens. And also there's Maddening Cacophony for 1 and a blue. It's a sorcery with kicker 3 and a blue. Each opponent mills 8 cards. If this spell was kicked, instead each opponent mills half their library rounded up. So for 6 mana, we can mill our opponents halfway, and this is really powerful, because again, we get a lot more options. And then we have Rune Crab for 1 blue. It's a 0/3 crab with landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent mills 3. So just by playing our land, our opponents are going to mill 3, and everything's going to add up with all of these cards. The next black commander we're going to talk about is Gonti, Lord of Luxury, my personal favorite. For 2 and 2 black, it's a 2/3 Aetherborn Rogue. It has Death Touch, and whenever Gonti enters the battlefield, we're going to look at the top 4 of target opponent's library. We're going to exile one of those 4 cards face down, put the rest on the bottom of that library in a random order. You may look and cast that card for as long as it remains exiled, and you may spend mana as though it were any mana of any type to cast that spell. So already Gonti is like, yeah, you can have whatever mana you want, you can do whatever you want, but it's only a mono black deck. So I'm a little tied between white or blue, because both promote having our creatures ETB, but I'm thinking I'm going to side with white, because ultimately I think there's more options for our creatures to ETB. So with cards like Eldrazi Displacer, for 2 and a colorless, we can exile another target creature and return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control. So for 3 mana, we get to have Gonti's trigger over and over. Or we have Sun Titan. We can grab a card with CMC 3 or less from our graveyard back to the battlefield, so maybe we have a sack outlet for a commander, and Sun Titan can keep bringing our commander back when it attacks. There's also Cloud Shift, or ephemerate. There's a lot of ways to exile our creatures and bring them back to the battlefield. So I think white is the perfect color for Gonti to have added to it. Moving on to the red commanders, we have Felden of the Third Path for 1 red. It's a 2/3 human artificer. We can pay 2 and a red and tap it. Create a token that's a copy of target creature card in your graveyard, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. It gains haste, sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So automatically I'm thinking we add black to it, right? It's going to help us have a lot more grave play, or maybe we go with blue. Maybe we can have a self-mill theme to it as well. Yeah, I think we're going to go with blue. I think that's the best option for us because we can use cards like Court of the Cunning like I used in an earlier example, except we can target ourselves for the milling, and it seems like this really wants us to fill our graveyard because we can just pick one from our grave and then put it onto the battlefield. It's going to go right back to our grave anyways because we're just going to be sacrificing it. So I think blue is the way to go. We can have Merfolk Looter for 1 and a blue. It's a 1/1 Merfolk Rogue. We can tap it and draw a card, then discard a card. This is going to help us just a little bit. You know, we get to draw a card and then we're going to fill our grave by discarding cards. So if we discard creatures, we don't really have to worry about that because we can always get them back with our commander. We can also do a little bit of wheeling with Jace's Archivist and Windfall. So each player is going to discard their hand and then draw equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. Discarding isn't going to hurt us when it comes to creatures because, again, we're just filling our grave with more options. This could help other graveyard decks, but I think ultimately we're going to get the most benefit out of it because we can keep recurring whatever creature we really want. And a really powerful creature is Mirmad Phantasm for 3 blue. Is a 5/1 spirit with flying. We can pay 1 and a blue, and Mirmad Phantasm's owner shuffles it into his or her library. If that player does, he or she reveals cards from the top of that library until a card named Mirmad Phantasm is revealed. That player puts that card onto the battlefield and all other cards revealed this way into his or her graveyard. Yikes, so that means we can have a lot of options in our grave, but again, remember, we're only creature focused, so this could really hurt us if another opponent's playing mill, or they have a lot of ways to make us draw our cards, because what if Mirmad's at the very bottom? Then we just milled ourselves and we're going to lose the next turn, but that's not very likely. This is a great card with Felden. And the last commander we're going to be talking about is Krenko Mob Boss for 2 red. It's a 3/3 Goblin Warrior. We can tap Krenko and create X 1/1 red Goblin creature tokens where X is the number of goblins you control. So of course I have to abuse Krenko tapping and untapping. And the color blue is really good at this, so immediately I thought of Intruder Alarm for 2 and a blue. It's an enchantment. Creatures don't untap during their controller's untap step. Oof. But whenever a creature comes into play, untap all creatures. We now have infinite goblins with Intruder Alarm, add Fervor, and now they all have haste. We win the game. You know, just 6 mana, including our commander's 10 mana, and we win the game just like that with combat damage. We also have other ways to untap our commander with Aura of Dominion. I don't think I've ever seen this card before, but for 2 blue, it's an enchantment. We can enchant a creature, we can pay 1, tap an untapped creature we control, untap enchanted creature. So we can enchant our commander, maybe we have another goblin lying around, we can pay 1, tap one of the goblins we just made, and again we have a lot of goblins made as long as we have the mana to pay for Aura of Dominion. And then of course there's Crab Umbra for a little more mana to activate its ability, but it's 1 blue. Another enchantment, we can pay 2 and a blue to untap enchanted creature, but what's really nice is that it has totem armor. So if our commander were to be destroyed, and that means board wipes or even destroy target creature, Crab Umbra is going to be destroyed instead. So it's another way to protect our commander from one more thing that could harm it. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this One More Color Commanders episode. It's a little bit different, but I actually really enjoyed this one. So again, if you like this video, hit that thumbs up button, comment below what you think, and subscribe for more Mango content. I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.